Hello and welcome. I'm Alana Milne and I'm the Clinical Lead for Speech Pathology at Care Squared. Today I'm pleased to bring you a Lunch and Learn webinar called Communication is Key. During the session today, if you have any questions, I'll look to answer those for you at the end. So if you write them into the chat box, I'll have a look at that towards the end of our session and try and answer your questions at that point rather than answering throughout. Our mission at Care Squared is to support all members of the community, whether you're a participant, carer, family member, support coordinator, support worker, or other member of our community. Thank you for joining us today. Today's presentation explores communication as being more than just talking, the concept of multimodal communication, how communication links to other skills, and how to support communication growth. So what really is communication? It's often thought of as just talking, and emphasis is certainly placed on our verbal skills. As we develop from infancy, we get excited about children's first words when they come, and we also use those sorts of things as key markers for development. However, communication is much more than just spoken words, and it's critical that we think about it more broadly. Communication really is a two-way street. It involves giving the messages and receiving messages. So we need to be able to both send and receive information for true communication. Additionally, true communication involves someone giving the messages and someone else or a few other people receiving those messages. So it's a social and contextual element as well. In receiving messages, we really have to be able to process the information and make meaning of what it is that we're receiving. We refer to this as receptive language. In expressing messages, we refer to all the things that we want to share as part of our human experience and connection with others. You can just see that the slides are skipping ahead on their own, so I'll just pop that there. So when we're sharing our connection and our human experience, we're thinking about wants and needs, certainly, but we're also wanting to think about hopes, dreams, plans, feelings, and thoughts. Importantly, communication is a basic human right. The International Communication Project is an advocate for those with communication disabilities, and they have said that everyone has the potential to communicate, and it's important that we recognise that. Whether a person's able to communicate is influenced by whether their communication abilities and preferences are accepted and supported in their environment, and whether they have access to the services they require to achieve their communication potential. What we want to think about there is that we want to really value what a person's message is and not the way that they're sharing it. Goodness, the slides are skipping forward again. I apologise. So what that means is that if someone is looking at something, if their body is shying away from something, if something makes them smile, if they've got their thinking face on, or if they're pulling our hand towards an object or pushing something off the table, we need to identify that as communicative. We need to value that message. Certainly, we look to shape those messages into really successful communication, and maybe into more formal communication methods that can be clearly interpreted. When we think about a communication disorder, we want to think about any kind of difficulty related to the giving and or receiving of messages. So not just that a person isn't able to speak, it can relate to how we interpret information, our understanding. This means that a communication disorder can impact, yes, our speech sounds, so the sounds we use when we're talking and putting words together, but also the way we use words, our grammar, the way we put sentences together to make meaning. It can also impact higher level skills such as telling stories, problem solving. It's how we comprehend information as well. So can we follow instructions, understand more nuanced language like metaphor, humour and sarcasm? How we organise our thoughts and problem solve and plan. It can also be about how we speak fluently, using our muscles of the mouth, face and neck and our vocal folds, so our voice production. Also our hearing and listening skills. Another aspect of communication disorder is interpreting body language and facial expression, and also reading the situation, so interpreting those contextual social cues. All of that can sit under the umbrella term of communication disorder. Importantly, communication disorder is owned by everyone. So others have to accept, support, and accommodate the variety of communication methods a person may need to use. What we want to think about is multimodal communication. So multimodal communication really is just a term for describing all the different ways we communicate. So that's the different modes that we use to communicate. So this often includes, handwriting, our spoken language, sending a text message, typing an email, but also things like gestures, facial expression, and body language. Everybody uses multimodal communication. We can also think about more abstract modes even, like using an indicator when we're driving our car to communicate that we're turning the corner. Gremlins in my computer today. Also thinking about things like coloured cards when we're playing sports, or flags that communicate very specific core messages. When we're thinking about people with communication disorder, it's really critical that we think about multimodal communication for them as well, when we're looking to accept their communication messages, but also when we're looking to teach or extend their skills, we want to think broadly about multimodal communication so that we allow that person to have the opportunity to communicate in a variety of ways and in different ways across different contexts. We always want to assume that communication can develop and grow. So the aim is to ensure that we don't limit anybody's potential. We don't want to judge or make assumptions. We need to consider, for people with communication difficulties and disorders, that a broader range of modes might be needed to provide multimodal communication for them. So we want to think about maybe alternatives to speaking or talking, or modes that might augment or supplement existing modes that the person has. So it might supplement speech if speech is unclear, or if it's really effortful for the person. As we go through the next few slides looking at various types of multimodal communication, bear in mind these modes are for both receiving and expressing information. So not only for the person to express, but also for them to receive messages and learn language or learn communication. So one form of multimodal communication is symbols. There's two different kinds of symbols on this page. The ones at the top are widget symbols, and the two different ones at the bottom are PCS symbols, and they're from Boardmaker. Symbols are really just sets of pictures or icons that represent certain words or concepts. Specific approaches can be taken to using symbols and supporting a person to use them, such as aided language stimulation or the PECS approach, and we can talk about those later. Symbols can be used for very specific topic or situational boards. They could be used to discuss critical issues. You can see the COVID-19 chat board down in the bottom corner there. But they can also be used for everyday things, ordering food, playing a game and commenting about it, describing what hurts when I go to a medical appointment. The other way that we can consider using symbols is to use them individually. So we can use them for making choices, we can use them for having a chat, we can use them for requesting items, and they don't always have to be in a set board or in a set frame. There's lots of different ways we can use symbols to support communication. Another multimodal option is alphabet boards. So these are used for spelling out messages. And you can see there's two different types here. One is based on the standard alphabet. So the one on the left just follows the standard alphabet flow. And the one on the right is like a QWERTY keyboard, so like our computer keyboard. These kinds of alphabet boards are best used for people who have literacy skills. Obviously, they're going to need to spell and interpret messages that have been spelled out for them as well. Usually, alphabet boards will come with some core messages, and you can see on the right-hand side where we've got the no and the yes, and then in those blue boxes, there's other key messages like this is the end of the word or do you understand? So there's a quick point where you can clarify something or ask for a repetition after you've done the spelling out. These kinds of boards could be used for temporary measure. So if somebody has had an incident and they can't currently speak, but they may be able to move back towards speaking modes or more successful speaking modes, we might use these in a temporary way, but they can also be used for long-term use as well. Cue cards are another option in terms of our multimodal communication. These can be symbols, like you can see on the left there, wait please, ask my husband or wife, if you don't understand my speech, ask me to repeat. Or it could be photos, and you can see someone has a little cue card that's attached to her belt. These can be used for short, specific messages. So the one in the center, which has a little timer attached, is about what time it is to eat my lunch or when I might need to take medication, for example. The one on the belt might be about where I want to go. So a very quick point will show that I want to go to the food court today. Cue cards can be used for things like communicating with people who are unfamiliar with your modes of communication. So you could have a cue card that just says, ask me yes, no questions, so that we know how best to engage with that particular person when we're communicating with them. Another option for multimodal communication is communication books. Now, there's lots of different varieties of communication books, and I've only popped a couple up on the screen for you to look at. Communication books really allow for deeper and more detailed conversation, but they also allow for applicability across different contexts or different environments because they tend to contain a lot of core vocabulary. So that is words that can be used in any circumstance and aren't just related to one activity. So it doesn't tend to be a topic specific book. It generally allows the person to carry it and move into different environments or different activities. The books on the left, so where you can see a person pointing and then the picture immediately under it, they are showing POD books, which is Pragmatic Organisation Dynamic Display. And the one on the right is an All About Me book. Another option for multimodal
Another
communication.
area of play is people play. So when I'm talking about that, I'm really talking about not using other objects, so not toy.
I'm going to skip forward there because we've got some extra voice happening. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what was going on. What I wanted to mention about the previous slide was that it relates to devices, so speech generating devices. And there are specially designed devices that can withstand force, have a variety of different access methods that can be attached or added, so eye scanners, head switches, and so on, and that have good volume and things like that. They've been built for purpose. But we can also use common tech devices like iPads with specialized apps that can operate quite similarly and can be a cheaper option, but sometimes may not be so great from a volume perspective or from longevity. This slide is looking at keyword sign language as another multimodal option. So we can use sign language as one of our primary sources of communication, so as in our deaf community who use Auslan, or more commonly for people with communication disorder, we use keyword sign rather than Auslan, where signs are used at the same time as speech and only for the core words. In Australia, we do actually use the Auslan signs. So we are adapting the language of the deaf community. We're using the signs, but we're not using the whole language of Auslan. So it's a different format and it's a different way that we tend to use that. It's really important that we look to value all modes of communication. It's fine, and in fact, it's desirable to be a multimodal communicator. So it's okay for someone to use a head nod or shake in one situation, a single word or a word approximation, an attempt at a word in another, or to change how they communicate depending on the setting. What we want to do when we're thinking about how to support people's communication is start by determining the skills someone already has and really looking to stretch and extend their skills from there. So if we have pointing, we might want to consider, could we make it more specific? Could we encourage pointing to happen more often? Could we transition from pointing to a person or object and onto a symbol board so we can look at making choices? Another thing is the when in Rome principle. So when we're trying to teach new words, concepts, or new modes of communication, you need to use the same mode as what you're expecting the person to use with you. What that means is that we're really looking at modeling how to use that mode of communication. So that's reinforcing those new words or concepts, or reinforcing the ways that we approach using that mode of communication. So if you're setting somebody up to use a device to support them in their communication with others, you need to use that device when communicating with them to model how to use it and to show that there's value in that form of communication. What it also allows is that we can demonstrate how to fix communication breakdowns. So if we get it wrong, how do we go back? How do we start again? How do we indicate that that wasn't the message that I wanted to convey? The reason we really focus on this too is to look at mapping language concepts onto the symbols or pictures, or onto the signs if we're using signing. This needs to ensure that this ensures that we build understanding before we expect use. So we can't just give someone symbols in their environment or a communication device and think that they're going to just know how to use it. We have to model that, and we have to map the language so that it's meaningful. We also want to ensure that we don't assume that we know what someone else is trying to communicate. We need to look at giving them our time and attention, not speaking for them, and being a really good communication partner. So that means to be attentive and to listen. For people with communication disorder, we often do need to give them more attention or different kinds of attention. So we may need to be at the same level. That may mean you need to crouch down beside a chair or move closer to a bed or a table where the person is sitting. We might need to be more specific in terms of making sure we have face-to-face type of contact rather than, both looking in the same direction or looking away from them as we speak. Another strategy is to consider investigating and learning about the different options that are actually available so that you can make best choices for people in your environment, presenting different options because you've done a bit of research and you have a sense of maybe where your special person is at and what kinds of support they need. So there are things like aided language stimulation, which is a communication strategy where the communication partner teaches symbol meaning and modelling of language by combining speech with selected vocabulary on a device or a symbol board. Keyword Sign Australia runs workshops if you want to learn about the principles to keyword signing and to start learning some signs and how that can work in conjunction with things like symbols or a device. You can also access pod workshops. So those were those communication books I showed earlier to understand how they're built, what the idea is behind the pragmatic organisation of them, so why they're useful for conversation and organised the way that they are, and to develop some skills in terms of implementing those and helping them be individualised for different people. You might also look at considering something like PECS training. So that's Picture Exchange Communication System. So it's a specific 6-phase teaching protocol that's aimed at teaching functional communication with symbols, from how to communicate right through to sentence structure and questions and things like that. There are also a lot of workshops, expos, website and YouTube videos on various AAC devices. So that's the devices I was talking about before, or the apps for iPads, and their use. So you can look on websites like Assistiveware and Spectronics for further information. You could also look at joining AGOSCI, an Australian group who look to provide advocacy and support around complex communication needs. This group is really good at putting together information and promoting various webinars or conferences that support people to understand more about complex communication needs and the variety of ways that we can support people who do have communication disorder and require support. Another strategy is also to be a communication advocate. So talking to others and sharing what you know about communication, either from today's webinar or from the various other options that you have at your fingertips. Additionally, you can encourage a person with communication needs to access support through speech pathology services. Certainly at Care Squared and in Care Squared Kids, we offer speech pathology services for people who have communication disorder and communication needs, and we look to promote multimodal communication. It's really important also to understand that communication links to a variety of our other skills. So behaviour is a really clear one when we're thinking about the paediatric population, but actually we need to think about behaviour and communication in relation to people of all ages. It's extremely frustrating not being able to communicate effectively or to have your messages misinterpreted or misunderstood, no matter people's best intentions. We can see some behaviours come forward when people are frustrated or feeling voiceless or limited. Behaviour additionally can sometimes come out if we're talking about sort of negative behaviours or behaviours of concern, where we're seeing people who aren't understanding the changes to their environment or what's going on in their life, who don't feel they have a lot of control perhaps over their environment and maybe have some sensory regulation issues, which then compound. So if we can't communicate what's happening inside my body or in my environment, or I don't understand what's happening to me, we're going to sometimes see some significant behaviours that can come out, and we might need to consider that these have an underlying communication basis. Additionally, literacy is linked to communication. So when we think about communication, we're thinking about our language, our comprehension, and our use of language. But literacy is really just written language. So we're looking at mapping from the information we know, the information we say, or the communication messages we want to impart across our multi-modes, but moving into that ability to either write that, type that, read that, interpret that. And that's how communication is so strongly linked to literacy. We have to use very special and very targeted intervention around literacy for people with communication disorder. Communication also links more broadly to learning, so in an academic or school context, as well as learning in job seeker type environments or just general incidental learning in our day-to-day lives. Mostly as humans, we tend to use our language modes as ways that we learn. We do demonstrate, we do model, we do talk about experiential learning, but it's usually got an overlay of words associated with it. If you have difficulty comprehending and understanding words or following instructions, it makes it harder to learn via that spoken mode. Communication also links to our play, and when we're looking at children, if we're looking at children who have disordered play skills and disordered communication, we see great interplay in terms of the development of those. Often we need to target specific pretend play skills and look at play development in order to enhance and extend communication development because they are so closely partnered. Communication also links to social interaction and our social skills. The way we interpret messages and the way we can interpret cues from other people is part of our communication, and then our reactions to people and our interactions with people are obviously impacted by our successful ability to interpret those cues. Often our social situations are quite nuanced as well and very changeable depending on who it is that we're engaging with and at what time and in what context. Communication in that way also links to our friendship. And I think for children in particular, our play situations link to our friendship building. For adults, it's more in that social interaction, communicative interaction, and those social contexts where we start to see our friendship and relationship building. Communication also links to our self-care and our regulation. So being able to express that we have a discomfort, that we're in pain, that we feel disgusting and need to have a shower because we're sweaty. Any of those sorts of things are about helping manage our care needs and also regulating our body. I feel too hot, I feel too cold, this breeze is bothering me, I need to seek medical help. Additionally, communication links to our mental health, being able to express how we're feeling, being able to seek help, being able to seek reassurances and connect with people, that ability to normalize what's going on. All of those elements can have an impact on our mental health. But additionally, in terms of identifying people who are struggling with mental health disorders, often we are relying on looking at communicative behaviours to look at that information also. So for us supporting people with communication disorder, we sometimes need to look more closely and more carefully if we can't rely on the communicative messages as part of our identification strategy for people who might have a mental health need and need to seek professional support. Communication also links to our job skills. We've mentioned before the social interactions, our regulation and our learning, and also our behaviour and our literacy. When we're looking at job seeker type skills, we're looking across that range of different skills, and our communication can be a significant feature that people look at when they're seeking to employ others. So how proficient are you at your intra and interpersonal skills, engaging with others, understanding tasks, and becoming a successful employee, I guess, of an organisation or in a supported organisation? How do we get the best out of you, and how do we support you to understand the tasks that we need you to achieve? I'll have a quick look to see if we've got any questions in our chat box now and see if I can answer any of them for you. Rebecca, the brand of the green timer that's in the cue cards. That is a good question, and actually off the top of my head, I cannot answer that for you. What I might do is get your information and respond to you if that's okay. I'm just trying to think, given the website where I sourced that, perhaps I'll be able to find that quickly so I can let you know where I found it, because it is a really useful one. It is from it doesn't want to show me. I'm going to have to get back to you, Rebecca. I can't quite pull it up on my screen at the moment to let you know. And it's just out of reach on my brain. I'm having a tip of the tongue experience in terms of finding that for you. Sorry, I should have noted that down on the slide so that you could see it there. I will touch base with our marketing manager and see if I can get your details from them. Otherwise, I'll put up a slide at the end and it will have an email address, and you could email if you didn't need to supply your address as you joined the webinar. Sorry about that. I'll just see if there are any other messages. It doesn't look like there are. I'll give us a couple of minutes if anyone wants to quickly type something in. It doesn't look like there are any further messages. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do hope that that presentation was useful. I look forward to being able to talk to people again on other topics. If you've got suggestions for topics or you have particular interests or needs, please do feel free to forward them to us so that we can make sure we're delivering webinar series that really meet the needs of our community. Thank you so much for your time today.